Welcome to Clienting, your place to get information about legal marketing and client development. This is Kelly Street, Marketing Director for Attorney Sync.
And this is Tsakalakis, one of the founders of Attorney Sync.
Hey, Guy.
Hey, Kelly.
Guess who we're talking to today?
Who are we talking to today?
Well, you know, but
I do.
We are talking to Julie Tolek, who I met at this year's tech show. And you had already previously heard of her and interacted with her, but I got her business card and I immediately thought we need to have her on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Because, she has the coolest brand.
I agree. One of my favorite brands in legal. So we're going to be very excited to talk to Julie, pick her brain, and provide some awesome branding tips to everybody who's tuning in.
So welcome, Julie. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, guys. Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on the show. It's funny. I've actually known Guy for, I think, a number of years now when I started going to tech show like 7 or 8 years ago.
I know. Time marches on.
I know. And Guy, it's funny because he's kind of seen me evolve from when I was a student to when I started my practice. So it's always cool to kind of come full circle and to have a conversation like this after I've done so many things that Guy's actually witnessed. So I'm happy to be here. My name is Julie Tolek. My firm is Think Pink Law. I practice in Massachusetts. In Metro West, we call it here. It's about 20 minutes outside of Boston, west of Boston. I practice firearms law, a little bit of criminal law now, family law mediation, and I do estate planning. I do all kinds of estate planning, but specifically in the firearm collector's context as well, because that's pretty intricate. I started my practice as a solo 5 years ago almost, and I'm still a solo. I work with another firm as well as an associate doing family law mediation with them. They're called Skylark Law as well.
Very cool.
So Think Pink Law, that's a totally different law firm name than I have ever heard. And we'll have to share a link of a photo of your business cards on our blog when we post about this, because your business cards are so incredibly cool. Can you describe them a little bit so people can get a sense of what they look like?
Sure. It's funny because I do have different business cards for different clients as well. This is my, the business card that I gave you is my favorite business card, of course, because I think it's so cool. It's a pink business card. One side of it is pink and the other side is white with, my phone number and my email address. But on the side that's pink, it says Think Pink Law with my logo. And on each side, flanking the logo, are 2 M4 firearms, which are in black. So it's like a silhouette of M4s, and they're kind of pointing at each other. So not necessarily crossing, but they're on a diagonal, and they cover the top corners, I guess, of the business card and logo. And there's also a pink one on the other side where my email address and contact info is.
And one thing I want to just point out here that I think I don't want to gloss over this because it's really important for especially lawyers that are thinking, I'm serving different clients. You actually have different cards for different clients, which I think is super smart because, and we'll get more into this, but what resonates with one client might not resonate with another client. In fact, might not speak to that client in the same way.
Right, exactly. And that's it's something that I put a lot of thought into. My first business card still had the same general layout with a pink background and the logo right in the middle. And my tagline is, "We do law differently." And so that appears on all of my business cards, no matter what. It's kind of the surrounding detail that is either there with the M4s, or there's no detail, but maybe I have a little bit more wording about what I do at the bottom. Like my family law business cards say, family law, wills, estate planning at the bottom underneath the tagline, and they do not have the firearms on them.
Yeah, that would be a little strange.
Although I'm still waiting. Like everybody asks me, have I ever had, a firearms and family law case overlap? And, I haven't had one from start to finish with overlap personally, but, with restraining order, with family law, there comes restraining orders sometimes. And with restraining orders, there comes questions about firearms and turning them in and what to do. So there certainly is potential for overlap. So it's something that I hadn't thought of, like, firearms law, gun law, but there are other types of law that, it touches upon too that aren't obvious at first glance.
Totally. So I happened to go on YouTube because I knew that you had done this talk at ClioCon in 2015. And I watched your presentation on creating a lasting digital brand. And there were so many things that stuck out to me and so many things that were really meaningful. So we'll have to link to that too. But I kind of wanted you to dive into how you think of and how you do branding, because you had this incredible process. And so I would love you to share everything you can about how you created the brand that works for you.
Sure, absolutely. So the beginning of the story, which I'll tell you briefly because I do think it's important. When I was in my last year of law school, I was interning at a small firm. I loved the firm culture. They were starting to do things online with Dropbox and stuff. And I used to work for Apple before I went to law school. So I knew that I wanted technology to be a big part of how I practiced law. So I really wanted to work for this law firm. They really wanted to keep me. I said, should I apply anywhere else? They said, no, we want you to come back to us. So I took the bar exam, had a meeting with them, afterwards, assuming that I had passed because I wanted to be able to hit the ground running when it was time to practice. And I met with the managing partner again, and he said, well, sorry, but we don't need you anymore. And so for me, that was like, well, okay, but I had no backup plan. I didn't know what I was going to do. And starting a solo practice had never occurred to me before that. I was thinking about what I liked about that firm and why I liked it. And, after I cried for a day or two, I had to really reconsider my options and think about what I was going to do. And the most important thing to me there were two very important things. The first one was, how do I stand out in a city like Boston that's oversaturated with lawyers, and it's law office of this person, that person, they all kind of start to sound the same. So how do I differentiate myself, and what practice area will suit my personality so I can remain in integrity with who I am as a person? If I'm going to embark on a journey of starting a law practice, I want to make sure that it's something that's easy for me because I can be myself, and that in line with my values. And being in integrity with who I am was very, very important to me because I don't like I find it very difficult. Forget the fact that I don't like being fake. It's very difficult for me to be fake. So I just had to fit with me. And so I thought, well, family law is a place where I felt like I could be myself because I wanted people to be able to feel comfortable with me and talk to me and to be relatable. I always say that, I'm just another person, just like my clients. It just so happens that my training is in the law and perhaps theirs is not. But, I'm still a human being, contrary to popular belief that lawyers are not human beings. I am, still a human being. So when I started thinking about how I would design a practice and a brand, these are all the things that I thought about that were important to me. And I didn't do it on purpose. Like, it wasn't a plan, like, here's all the things I'm going to think about so I can create a good brand. It was just like, okay, well, what am I going to do and how am I going to do it and what's important to me? And so that's where I started, and just kind of everything fell into place organically once I decided what was important to me.
I know you put a lot of thought into the specific colors that you used and how you crafted your logo. And I know you also just mentioned your tagline a little bit earlier too, of "We do law differently." But I loved the story that you told of how you came up with the color.
Mm-hmm. So when I was in law school, I started a blog called Legally Blonde BOS for Boston. And the color of the blog was pink. There is a movie called Legally Blonde, and it's actually been turned into a play and everything, all kinds of different spin-offs from that. But taking that kind of as I'm blonde, so I was like, well, why don't I play with this and see, how it goes? I don't take myself super seriously because I feel like, you got to have fun in life a little bit too. And so I was like, okay, well, this is fun. So I'll, see how this goes. And in law school, I would blog about, how I take notes in school and how to do an interview and things that I thought would be helpful for other people living in Boston and going through the law school experience. And of course, so the color of the blog is pink. And I would study at Starbucks. And everything I had was pink. I had pink pens, pink notebooks. I still use pink pens and pink notebooks. And people got to know me as the pink lawyer or the pink law student, and that kind of stuck. And so when it was time to come up with a name for my firm, I didn't, for the reasons that I mentioned before, I didn't want it to be just, law offices of Julie Tolek or whatever. I didn't want to be just another name. And I was talking to a friend of mine who has a great brand himself. His brand is Bye Bye DWI from New Hampshire, Mark Stevens. He was actually my first Twitter lawyer friend ever when I joined Twitter as a law student. And he said, you have to do something with pink. Like, you just have to. And I thought, well, can I really? This is like the law. Oh my God, that's, unheard of course. And he said, no, do it. And I thought, well, starting out, now is the time to take a risk. So I did. And he helped me come up with Think Pink Law. I remember distinctly, you hear those stories about, oh, well, they came up with this, they wrote the contract on a napkin, or, they designed the thing on a napkin. Well, we really did. We were having lunch and we were brainstorming on a napkin, and we came up with Think Pink Law. And that's kind of how that launched. And I was like, well, I want there to be meaning behind it, not just pink is, it's pink is pink, it's a color, fine. But then I started diving deeper, and I looked into the meaning of the color pink in branding, and what kind of emotions it could represent. So my pink is a very bright, almost fuchsia pink. It's not a soft pink. And so I wanted it to be bright and not muted, because I wanted it to be in your face and noticeable and strong. And because the color is, pink, and what we think of as something that's, generally when you think pink, you think soft, even if it's a bright pink. I wanted to make sure that the lettering and the logo was very strong and not like a calligraphy like script, like fluffy font, but I wanted it to be bold to kind of contrast with the fact that the name is, Think Pink. So I put a lot of thought into that. When I looked up the meaning of, pink is a combination of red and white. Red represents strength and power and perseverance and success. And white represents purity and thoughtfulness. And so I thought that the blending of those two to make pink, and all of those characteristics, were things that either I thought I embodied or that I wanted my firm to embody as the values in what I do, and what I wanted to represent for people. I don't think my clients really know. I get a lot of, oh, pink, that's cute. And of course, in my head, I'm like, well, yes, it's cute, but it's not just cute. So this isn't, I go into it in a little bit in detail on my website if people go look and they see the story behind pink. But to me, it does mean a lot more than cute.
So even if people don't get the whole story, if they don't go into reading the whole story, do you feel like you get a different kind of client because of your branding?
It's an interesting question, because I could get all philosophical and be like, well, I wouldn't know, because they wouldn't come to me if they were not the kind I wanted to attract. But I don't get a set specific type of client. Most of my clients, I would say, are male, maybe because the firearms industry is predominantly male. So naturally, most of the people seeking help with firearms are male. With the divorce stuff, I've had, male clients and female clients. So it hasn't necessarily, as far as I know, really made much of a difference in the clients that come to me. Perhaps there are clients that see it and they rule me out because of the name. And so I would never know. But otherwise, I don't necessarily think so, or I don't know the answer.
So here's a kind of maybe a follow-up or a thing I'm interested in knowing is how, in this, but anecdotally, I'm not looking for like specific data, but my guess would be, well, let me just ask first before I start guessing. How often does it come up in conversation? Like how often does it come up with a potential client, or just while you're out that people are like, oh yeah, Think Pink Law, or you're on a call, whether it's with the client or with a prospective client, and they end up initiating some kind of conversation about Think Pink Law?
I would say probably 9 out of 10 clients bring it up.
Yeah. That's what my guess was going to be. So
it's usually like, even they'll bring it up first, they'll bring it up in their initial email, or it'll come up in, conversation when I first meet them. Usually by the time I have the in-person consult, people already have my contact information. But when I go in, I give them my card with the M4s on it, because I think it's a really badass card and I like to give it out. And so, sometimes we'll start talking about Think Pink Law real quick then too, because they'll have more questions, but it definitely comes up very often.
And I think that's the important thing. And I love the story. I think it's so valuable for lawyers to understand your thought process for this because, so many firms are my name law firm. And that's the real power for, getting away from like all the fuzziness of what branding can mean. At the end of the day, one of the most important things is that it's memorable. And so, just to kind of reiterate for people that are thinking about how do they do this for themselves, I think the fact that you got to explore like what you really care about, who you are, and don't be afraid of that. I think that's another thing that comes up a lot in conversations with lawyers. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this and whether you think it's more of an innate thing or if it was something that you had to explore for yourself. But, the thing that I commonly hear is from lawyers, I'm not willing to, whether it's a risk aversion thing or they want to keep it appealing to all the people all the time. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that because you'd probably recognize that some people might be like, I'm not really interested in the gun thing. And so maybe that's a turnoff to people. But how do you kind of approach from a conceptual thing, this fear that, hey, I don't want to offend somebody, balanced against this standing out thing, which is so important?
It's a difficult thing to answer. And I think for each person, with their personality, it's going to be a little bit different. I think the first thing is to learn or accept somehow that you're never going to please everyone. And,
right.
If there are people that we call like, quote unquote, people pleasers that, want to please everyone all the time. For better or worse, I've never been one. So I didn't really feel like I had to please everyone all the time. However, that doesn't mean that when I get pushback from a client, it doesn't, upset me or I don't take it to heart. Because of my branding and because I enjoy what I do, for better or worse, I'm very emotionally invested in the work that I do. And so when people have, take issue with either my branding or whatever, for a second, I do take it personally and it does bother me. But I know that, if it bothers that person or turns them off for whatever reason, they are probably not the type of client I am going to enjoy working with anyway.
Right.
And there are other lawyers that might be a better fit for them anyway. So to keep that in mind and to kind of separate, and I've had to teach myself how to do this, to separate that personal upset and disappointment if somebody doesn't like it or they don't want to work with me because of it, and to say, well, that's good because it's naturally weeding out the clients that might not be a good fit to work with me if the way I do things does not resonate with them, which, why would you want to work with somebody that might not be a good fit? Like the best clients are sometimes the ones that you say no to or say no to you. So, but I think that's it's not an easy thing to accept and to be okay with. So that's there's a learning process to that. The other thing I think is that law school definitely does not teach you that you can be yourself. And it does not teach you that you can have a personality that is who you are and blend that in with the attorney that you are. For me, and I think for solos in general, it's an easier blend because since we are solos, we are our business and we are the person that, is hands-on with clients and we're representing our own brand. A question I get a lot of the time is, well, what if it's big law or a big firm and you don't have the flexibility to do branding from a visual perspective that you would want to do if you were a solo? And to that, I say, well, at the end, you are still you as a person, as a lawyer with a personality. So whatever personality you have as a human and as a lawyer, that's your branding. Even if you work for a big firm that dictates what your logo or your colors are going to be, the end user, your client, is still going to be working with you as a person. They're not working with like the logo. They're not working with, they might come to the firm because of that logo, but the experience that they're going to have is with working with you. And that's your branding. The branding is the experience. It's far more than just visual. So I encourage people that work at big firms or bigger firms or firms where they don't have control over the visual aspects of the branding to keep in mind that branding is also experiential. And, if you write a certain way, if you speak a certain way, if you present a certain way, if you interact a certain way with your clients, that's all part of branding. And so you still have potential to do your own branding, even if you work at a larger firm.
Oh, I love that. Another thing from your ClioCon talk, you had these 3 Ps that you talked about, kind of what you think branding should be based on. I don't know if that was a thought from you or if you came up with that from a branding book or from somewhere else, but I would love it if we could talk a little bit about those.
Sure. And I guess and this actually helped me in branding. So when I started preparing for my ClioCon presentation, I read the book, I think it was Talk Like TED, like how to give TED Talk presentations, TED Talks. And one of the tips in there was that people like things in small chunks. And when you can find a few small chunks that kind of resonate and go together, like to create an equation of sorts, it makes things more interesting. And so I kind of adapted that, and I was like, okay, well, what are like the three most important things that I can find a good way to put together? And I came up with passion and personality equals persuasion, my 3 Ps of branding, they overlap a lot. Passion, personality, have to overlap because your personality will reflect in your passions. And when you're passionate about something, your personality will flow through. So it's kind of, they're very connected and almost redundant, but they're also very different too, because passion is something that you feel and you get excited about. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be related to work. And your personality is the way that you show your passion to everyone and kind of make those connections. So with personality, I say even robots have personalities. So if you go back to what I was saying before, like law school doesn't teach you some of these things. Well, if you're naturally kind of monotone and kind of a robot, and that's just who you are, then that's your brand. Like by all means, run with that and go with that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, like a personality doesn't have to be like, oh, pink and bubbly. And, just because I'm doing it this way doesn't mean that everybody needs to do it this way. It's kind of, going back to who you are as a person and how to bring that forth to make connections with people that you want to do business with. So one of the things that I always say for your personality is to be human or a robot with personality and to tell a story. Like stories connect with people. And this is also something that law school doesn't teach you. And I think a lot of lawyers forget is that we are all just people living the life experience. And so when I experience something like, my cat got sick and I had to take her to the vet or something like that, and I share that with a client that maybe has a cat who got sick, there's a connection there. There's something there that we have in common in a human life experience way that has nothing to do with law and has nothing to do with the practice of law, but it's something that builds a bond that is even like deeper than why that person walked into my office to begin with. And that builds trust, and that builds having something in common. And so this makes you relatable. And so I say, be human and tell a story and be relatable. I have them like in my list, if you will. They're different elements, but again, they're all connected. And so when in doubt, always put yourself in the client's shoes. Like if I were looking for an attorney, what kind of a person would I want to go to? Do I want to go to somebody that I have things in common with because that just seems like a better experience? Or do I want to go work with somebody that has no interest in the same things that I do and we have nothing in common, and so they might not even understand where I'm coming from? Of course, you're going to want to work with somebody who has a better understanding of where you're coming from. And the way you find that out is to share pieces of yourself and to tell your stories and to be human with those people.
Awesome.
Guy, did you find going to law school too, because I am the non-lawyer in this group, did you find when you went to law school that you kind of felt like there was this one right way to be a lawyer and that was the certain personality and that was how you had to be?
For me, like this kind of stuff never even came up in law school, right? Like we never really talked about, I think in fairness, kind of date myself. So I went to law school in the early 2000s. And I think to the credit of many law schools, I think some of them are starting to have these conversations about whether it's branding, business development, things that actually matter to practicing besides just history, which is good. But for us, it never really came up. I mean, we never really had conversations about that. We never talked about how do you think about who your clients are and how you're going to provide them service and how you're going to get clients. I mean, none of that stuff came up. I think that was at least my experience. And I think some of that's changing. I think they're getting better and And I'm noticing, I think Julie's a great example of a lot of the next generation of lawyers and younger lawyers. They're almost like it's innate. They're already starting to do this kind of stuff in law school. They're starting to think about this in law school. I don't know if Julie, if your law school started nudging you in that direction, or if you kind of just realized it yourself because you recognized what was going on in the world. Yeah, I think that there's a changing of the guard with that stuff, but we didn't have any of that.
I didn't have any of that either. I mean, the most we had is a class, which I didn't take because I didn't know I was going to be starting my practice at the time. It was, something like starting your law practice or how to start a law practice or something. And it's, all the like, what kind of mahogany desk should I buy? And I was like, are you kidding? Like, this is what's on the syllabus. Like, give me a break. But at the same time, I didn't really know what I know now back then. Like, I didn't think about any of this branding stuff. And, for me, for better or worse, it just kind of came naturally when I started doing it. And, it was a little bit of planning. Like, as I learned more, or as I decided how I wanted to run my business more, I would start researching more. And so it kind of, went hand in hand. But I don't think it's not top of mind to think about this stuff. It's not like a natural, unless it's within you, it's not a natural reaction. And I didn't even know it was within me. I had no idea. I mean, I've always been, kind of creative and, artsy fartsy and stuff, but applying it in a business sense is something, I never thought of that. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur and do branding and stuff like this. Never. It just kind of happened and I was good at it. And so I'm lucky in that respect. But I do believe that it can be taught once people realize that it's possible.
Yeah. So I think we've had some awesome, this has been phenomenal. I'm curious, I kind of want to switch directions slightly and talk tactical. So, a lot of lawyers...
No pun intended, right?
Yeah, right. Or maybe I did intend it. But, so a lot of lawyers, especially solos, very budget conscious, hiring a branding coach or hiring a designer, that kind of stuff can seem scary and expensive. Talk a little bit about how you approach that, whether it's design contest sites or if you worked with a designer or what went into the actual on the ground getting Think Pink Law and the logo and the tagline and then getting it designed and out there in the world. How did you go about that?
So I used a company online called Elance, and I think they're called Upwork now. I think my designer is actually still on it. But basically, if you publish your project and people can bid on it and for very little cost. I don't think I spent more than $200 on my logo. And maybe even less than that. I'm highballing it a little bit, but basically, so I posted my project. I want to make this logo for a law firm, blah, blah, blah. Then people started bidding on it. I looked at the profiles and the portfolios, rather, of the people that were bidding on my project because I wanted to make sure they were doing stuff that I liked. There are a lot of designers there that will reuse parts of logos or use clip art or do really bad work. And so I think it's important, as a side note, I would say definitely look at people's portfolios and look at their reviews and feedback from other clients they've worked with if you're going to find somebody online, because all that stuff should be on there. So I found somebody that I really liked what they did, what they had done for other clients, and I started working with them. I say them because it was one guy that I communicated with, but I think there were several designers that worked with him. And one of the first things they sent me was a questionnaire that asked questions about my business. What kind of a business is it? What's your industry? But then more like, what is the look and feel? And if you've ever, read anything about design or branding, look and feel is a like intellectual property term that's like thrown around a lot. And so it's a difficult thing sometimes to put look and feel into words. But for me, it was a lot of fun to be able to describe my law firm, as being, I'd have to I don't remember what I said off the top of my head, but stuff like fun and sassy and smart and intellectual. And so the design of my logo has a crest on it. So I knew I wanted a crest because I wanted that to represent knowledge, and we're continually learning. And so basically I told them, look, I want a crest. I don't know how you want to make the crest, but go ahead and make a few crests and we'll see which one I like. And I wanted the bright pink, and my other two colors were black and white. And they asked what colors you want. And so basically you give the company all of these details about the technical aspects of your logo and also like the meaning behind what you're doing at your business. I remember the day that and this is so cheesy, but like I get goosebumps thinking about it. Like I remember the day that I got my logo proofs, and they did 5 or 6 of them for me. And I was running outside because I used to be a runner. And I remember I got the email on my phone and I like stopped in the middle of, where I was running and like was looking at all of my images. And it's if you're into this and as you start getting into it, it's such an amazing feeling to see what you have verbally expressed actually put into visual and kind of the pieces of it coming together. It's so incredible. And so I took a little bit of I think 4 of the different mock-ups that they made and combined them into one. So they did some more revisions for me. And that's how we came up with the final logo. And again, all for like under $200, I think.
That's so awesome. It's such a great story too, because, the thing I think so many lawyers, and I've talked to lawyers about different platforms that they've used and different design processes and people. But I think one thing that really came out in what you just described is you were very much a part of that process. You giving the feedback, coming in with having done whether it's brainstorming or working the process through understanding your passion, personality, persuasion, that really probably helped that, I would guess, versus just saying, build me a logo, and then it comes out and you don't like it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can't even imagine like how would they know what to do if you don't give them anything. So it was definitely, a lot of people say, oh, did you have your logo designed or did you do it? And I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, I don't know how to design. I know kind of in my head what I want, but as far as putting things together visually, I leave that to the experts once I can tell them. And that's why it's such a special experience, I think, because you think all these things about what you want and then you see it done. And when you see it done by somebody that's good at it and it's exactly what you wanted, but you never knew you wanted, it's really cool. And so then they sent me, so I had the logo done and then I had them do the business card. So they did the layout for the business card, but a good designer should, and this is also a tip, like they should send you the original files so you can work with them later. Like the client is the person that should own the work when you're working with a designer after they design it. So I have all of the original files for my logo and for my business card. And then I did letterhead, which I changed and, kind of rearranged stuff on it later. So I own all those original files so I can use them. And they send you, the name of it exactly escapes me and maybe one of you guys know, but it's basically it's like a summary sheet and it has like the names of your colors and what the design, every color has a number. It's called a hex code for design purposes. So if you were like in Photoshop and redoing something, you want to make sure you're using the same pink. Like I don't just want to click on a color swatch and take a chance that I'm using the same pink, but there's an actual designated number to my pink. I used to know it by heart, but I haven't looked at it in a while. But you want to make sure you have all those details from the designer and you get them. Because if you ever want to make any changes, you want to make sure you're using the right, consistency, the same consistent color throughout everything. So you can just type in those numbers when you're designing and do anything, with your logo after you have it.
Yeah, the sheet you're talking about, or sometimes it's a little mini booklet, is called a brand guide. And to back you up, Julie, I also recommend getting not only your hex code, but the RGB, which stands for red, green, blue, just because sometimes printers or different things where you're putting your color will only be able to take an RGB code or RGB numbers and won't have hex code. But yes, those are super important.
Yeah, I think hex code maybe is more online. And then when you're sending stuff to actual printer, I've done, I think, RGB codes, maybe. But I do. That is right. I do remember. I do have both.
I want to just go back to one thing you said about how you were talking about how clear you were with what you wanted and you had put a lot of thought and time into it. And the designer sent you a sheet to fill out. Because a few months ago, we did a new logo redesign here at Attorney Sync, and we actually used 99 designs.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of them.
Yeah, it's really cool. And we did a design contest. So I filled out a little sheet, got a bunch of designs, and we were not getting what we wanted. Like, nothing just felt right. There were a lot of, kind of like you mentioned, reusing designs. There were a lot of ones where it was like, oh, well, that's a logo that I already know exists elsewhere in the world and is very popular. So what I found, much like you said, I needed to be more clear. And I redid the contest, got much more clear and direct. Guy and I had a big heart-to-heart about like, what do we really want this to be? And gave them examples. And it turned out amazing the second time. but you need to be really clear, because if not, you're going to get just insanity.
Mm-hmm. And that's a hard thing too. Like, I mean, you don't always know what you want necessarily either until you see what you don't want. And that puts more into perspective, maybe what you do want. So I feel like I don't want listeners to think that like everyone should know exactly what they want. I mean, it's a process, and sometimes weeding out what you don't want first can lead you to really narrow down what you do want.
Yeah. And I think that's so important too when you're working with a designer to have it built into the engagement that, you're going to need iterations, right? You're going to need revisions, because as prepared as you come to the table and as much as you participate, both Julie and Kelly said, it's a process, and you're going to start to narrow and things are going to come into focus through iterations. But my guess would be it's very, very rare that first crack at things, you're going to come out of it with exactly what you want. And so, some platforms, designers, whatever, will specifically say, you get 1 iteration, 2 iterations, 3 iterations. But the more that you can build into that and recognize that it is a process, I think you're going to have more success and be very happy with what comes out.
Definitely.
All right, Julie, any last little tidbits to share with our listeners on creating a lasting digital brand to steal your ClioCon title?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to go back real quick. We talked about the 3 Ps, and I mentioned passion and personality a little bit, but I didn't really talk about persuasion. And I just wanted to kind of, I guess, clarify, I think people think persuasion sometimes is a bad thing, or they think so, persuasion is salesy or persuasion is slimy. And, persuasion is the end goal. I mean, the goal of all of this, yeah, it's fun and I have a lot of fun doing it. But if I didn't have a business to build, would I necessarily sit here and think about, my logo and what I was going to do with it? Probably not. It came up because I had a business to build. So, the goal in the end is to persuade people to work with you and to influence them. And it doesn't have to be, it's not manipulative, but it's that resonation with somebody that will influence them and persuade them to work with you. So my last P, persuasion, is, where everything kind of comes together. And if you didn't have the goal of persuasion, then those other things before that, the personality and the passion, they wouldn't be as powerful if they weren't working to, make those connections to influence people to want to work with you.
It's such a great point. It's so funny too, because persuasion, especially for litigators, it's like a no-brainer when it comes to actually practicing, right? Like, I'm here to persuade, but then you talk about marketing and they're like, oh no, persuasion, false, misleading, manipulative. And it's like, no. So I really appreciate that you made that point.
Yeah. And it's, it's all about, and in the end, it's all about the experience. I mean, if people forget all of this, and, it's, there's too many things to remember, and how do I be myself, and what kind of a story should I tell? I mean, in the end, it's, what kind of an experience do you want people to have working with you? And if you look at that and break it up into pieces and mini experiences, that kind of might be an easier way to look at it, because the brand is an experience. It's a visual experience and an in-person experience and an online experience. It's everything that happens when you work with somebody.
I love ending on this note. Julie, if people have more questions for you or want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
You can find me online at thinkpinklaw.com. My Twitter handle is thinkpinklaw. I do have an Instagram as well, where I actually mostly post pictures of food. But if you look up thinkpinklaw.keto lawyer, Keto lawyer, you can find me on Instagram. And of course, you can email me at julie@thinkpinklaw.com.
Great. Thank you again so much for joining us. I am really excited for people to think about and maybe even rethink their brand after this conversation.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Julie, thanks so much. Great stuff today. Really appreciate it. And as always, thanks to everybody for tuning in. If you have questions, suggestions, or would like to be a guest, please don't hesitate to contact Kelly or I. You can go to attorneysync.com or find us on all the different places that we're at. But thanks again. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Kelly. Everyone have a wonderful day.